Hi ranchers, today we're gonna go over how to properly heat your chicks.
I love being warm!
So thank you for checking our video today. We're gonna go over how to properly heat your chicks and young chickens.
Heating is very important because if you buy your chickies in the fall or winter time just so you can get a head start on spring, heating is really important. You know, here in New England, one day it's 70 degrees, next day it's snowing.
So basically, if you have 1, 2, 3 day old chicks, basically chicks that just hatched, you would know that they basically hatched in an incubator that's typically set at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So when they are just a few days old, you definitely want to make sure that wherever you're keeping your brooder, that you basically want to keep it at about 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Over time, you'll notice that they probably don't need the heat as much, and a great way to tell if they need heat or not, or if they're too hot or too cold, is check their behavior. So if you have a heat lamp or whatever heat source you're using, and they're not underneath it, they're sort of avoiding it and basically at the extremities of your brooder, then that means they're probably too hot. You might also notice that they're panting where they typically have their mouth open and then they flap their neck like this. If they look like they're panting, then basically they are too hot. So you would have to basically lift the heat source higher or get them further away so that they look like they're evenly spread out. That's when you know it's the perfect temperature. Now, if it's too cold, they'll basically pick a corner and they'll all start stockpiling like it's a mosh pit at some heavy metal rock concert, and they're all shoved into a corner trying to share body warmth. You have to be careful with this because when they get to that point, just like at any mosh pit, they could potentially trample each other to death. So that's a very easy way to do it, but overall, it's all about paying attention to their leggies and wingies.
Well, we talked about what we put water in, so what do we put heat in?
We can't put heating in a container.
This may be a silly question, but I believe that no question is stupid, and I always want to help people.
Well, so can you like give us an idea?
I don't know, like, you know, maybe your chicks are too cold or something, so they go into the kitchen, they grab a cooking tray or whatever, throw the chicks in, and then they're like, oh, can I leave the oven door open and turn on the heat that way?
Yeah, basically you'll make chicken pot pie if you do that. So don't do that. That's not a good way to have a heat source for your chicks. So as far as heating equipment goes, you typically have two options. Either a heating lamp or a heating plate. This is usually the only two options industry-wide, even from commercial farming. So there isn't really much out there, and there are pros and cons to both a heating lamp and a heating plate. As far as the heating lamp, you can see right here and look at it really well. Look how dusty the heating lamp goes. So even though the heating lamp, I'm sure you've seen it at some buffet and it's nice and warm, and it's usually a clear bulb or a red bulb, and it keeps it nice and warm and everything, and it does a pretty good job historically. But some of the downsides are that heating lamps can be very dangerous, and you can see how he's shaking that, so parts of the heating lamp can come loose, and that would be a disaster if it crashes to the ground. This is actually the reason for many barn fires, because the bulb is so hot that by the time it falls and crashes to the ground that typically has sawdust, shavings, some type of substrate, that it's so hot that it's enough to create enough spark in the substrate, causing that barn fire, and then the whole thing typically burns down. So the other reason why this can be a little bit dangerous, because as you see all that dust, that's actually feather dust from your day-old chicks. So basically when they start becoming 1 or 2 weeks old, that's when they start shedding their original down feathers and they start growing their juvenile feathers, which look like normal feathers. That's when you get a bunch of feather dust. And that alone could also start a fire. And it typically smells like hair is on fire or burning. Feathers are actually very similar to hair follicles. So that's why they smell very similar when they're burning. So you just want to be very careful with that. As I said, when you've been to a buffet, you probably saw a heating lamp like this. This one's clear. Sometimes you see them red. Usually for poultry, people like to get red lights because it makes everything red so that the chicks don't keep pecking and pecking and pecking in case one of them has a bloody injury. And as we were saying earlier in the video, basically if they see anything red, they typically really like to peck at it, which could cause some injuries. So there's this type of bulb, and then there's also a ceramic bulb. For those of you who had reptiles before, you might be familiar with this type of bulb. It's a ceramic bulb, and no light emits from this, but heat emits from this. Now, although this is a lot safer than your regular heat bulb, this is actually not as efficient, even though it's less wattage, because the heat only radiates from this coil here. So the heat's only going in one direction, but the heat lamp is round and goes in an omnidirection, in pretty much every direction.
Even though this isn't round.
Right, and of course the cover shields most of the heat. If you do touch the metal though, be careful, you could hurt yourself because it would be hot as well. That's pretty much it for bulbs. Matthew will go over the other option, which is heating plates.
Heating plates. Buy it, it's good. The end.